So my hot take is that ADHD can make you better at product because it makes you better with people, understanding what they need to build and then persuading people to build things with you. What I've realized, and this is from feedback, which now makes a lot more sense from colleagues, is I hyper-focus on things really quickly. So for example, if I'm in a meeting and there's a slide, I can hyper-focus and generally I can get through information on that slide faster than most people in the room. Not because I'm smarter, just because this neurodiversity that I have.
Hello and welcome to another episode of One Night in Product Hot Takes Edition, where I speak to one person about one thing, get straight to the point, and find out what's on their mind. Now, I'm taking a bit of a break from new hot takes at the moment, but you can still head over to onenightinproduct.com to find all of my old hot takes, as well as longer interviews with thought leaders and practitioners, and links to the podcast on your favourite podcast app and YouTube, where you can like, share, subscribe, leave a comment or review, and let me know what you think. All right, so in front of me, I can see a pretty swanky-looking flat or apartment, hoping that it's actually a real one and not just a Zoom background, and a person that's familiar to me, but maybe not to you, so I'm going to throw straight over, ask you to state your name, where is your base, what it is you do, and most importantly, what's your hot take?
Thanks, Jason. This is a real apartment, and I appreciate the adjectives you use to describe it. I'm Benji. I work as a product leader, run my own agency at the moment, a product and design agency that goes from idea to live with everyone from PE-backed enterprise companies to startups looking at product market fit.
And what's your hot take?
So my hot take is that ADHD can make you better at product because it makes you better with people, understanding what they need to build and then persuading people to build things with you.
All right, so let's take a step back a bit. And obviously ADHD is something that a lot of people in the product world have been talking about. It seems to be almost a kind of a cliche these days that ADHD is something that kind of attracts, or rather product management is something that attracts people with ADHD because it's such a variety and there's so many different things to get involved in. But if I take a step back, and obviously most people know what ADHD is, but how are you defining ADHD from your perspective, like in your own words? And I guess also by extension, why do you think that maybe some of the key characteristics of ADHD are so multiplicative for product managers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll caveat this, but by saying I got diagnosed with ADHD only a few years ago. A lot of my life made a lot more sense after that diagnosis. I'm very lucky that I was able to have that diagnosis. Actually, the company I worked for helped me pay for that to go and have a psychologist analyze me. And also, there are two parts to ADHD. For those who don't know, there is the AD and the HD. One's around attention, one's around hyperactivity. So I both can't sit still, both physically and mentally, which is great sometimes and not other times. In terms of then how that's related back to product, what I've realized, and this is from feedback, which now makes a lot more sense from colleagues, is I hyper-focus on things really quickly. So for example, if I'm in a meeting and there's a slide, I can hyper-focus and generally I can get through information on that slide faster than most people in the room. Not because I'm smarter, just because this neurodiversity that I have. It also means, though, that I then have basically zoned out of that thing much quicker than everyone else does. And if you're a product manager or a product leader, and potentially you're more of a manager than a maker, going back to the famous article, you might have lots of back-to-back meetings. People always say, how come you can switch so quickly from one meeting to another meeting? It's because I already zoned out of the previous meeting 5 minutes before the end of it, whatever else is still engaged in it. So I can start the next meeting because my brain's already thinking about it before then, which sounds really rude, and it kind of is in some capacities, but I can't change it. But for what I do for a job, which is majoritively manager, not maker, it makes me really strong at it.
But that's interesting though, because there's this idea of active listening, and this idea that you shouldn't be thinking about the next thing whilst the person's still talking, but that you should almost just listen for the sake of listening and then kind of compose a response, which kind of seems a little bit different to what you're describing. And, to be honest, it's something that I myself, have struggled with in the past, something I always have to lean into on the podcast as well, especially for the hot takes, because I'm sitting there listening to you, having to kind of construct the next question so that there's not too much of an uncomfortable gap in between. But this idea of kind of having to, or not necessarily having to, but like formulating the next response, or like kind of thinking ahead because you've kind of already got past the first bit because you've kind of focused in, potentially while someone still is talking. Do you feel that sometimes can get you into trouble if maybe you kind of miss something, or maybe you even look like you're zoned out or that you're thinking about something else and they actually take offense? Is that something that can happen?
100%. But all those things, yes. That is why I carry around Post-it notes. I carry around pens everywhere I go. I try and
proper product manager
and agile coach before that. I try and speak last. So because of this intention, this inclination to want to jump in, that's a very ADHD thing. I can't change the inclination. I can know I've got it. And I can say, right, I've hyper focused. I've got an opinion. I write my opinion down, and then I hold it there until everyone's ready to start speaking. And then I see whether what they say then changes what I've written down. And I'll try always to speak last. And then the other thing, which is a bit of a tough one to explain to people I work with them, is I doodle. And I learned this one from other people. So I think, understand, write down my opinion, and then the wait time, I doodle. And people have said to me, oh, that's really rude. I say, no, that's me desperately trying to listen to what you're saying. And it's so much easier for some people with ADHD to listen if they are doodling at the same time. Actually, people have learned the opposite. If I'm not doodling, it means I probably don't care. And that's actually way more rude to once you work with me for a little while.
But wait, you're not doodling right now. So does that mean that you don't care about what I'm saying to you?
No, I mean, I'm writing down things constantly as we're doing it. And one-on-one isn't too bad, to be honest, because it's going to often be me and then you. When you get in a group room, often you've got a team as a product manager, for example, as a product leader, there's 7, 8 people in it, much harder. And you're constantly trying to read the emotions of the room, then doodling's really, really helpful for that.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, though, because it's something that I've seen people do before. I've definitely doodled myself in the past in meetings, just kind of idly sketching away, doing like cross-hatching or whatever, just something to kind of keep my hands busy. And I've often been accused of being kind of, I don't know, I've never been diagnosed or anything, but like I've definitely, accused maybe is the wrong word, but I've definitely been, people have suggested that I have certain sorts of hyperactivity and such, and I've no idea. Maybe one day I'll check. But I guess this idea that different people have different ways to try to focus in on the conversation. Now, that's perfect for those people, but I also know, and I know from personal experience and from experience of friends, that people that aren't necessarily neurotypical can sometimes end up, kind of, you touched on it yourself, almost getting in trouble for the kind of some of the things that they have to do to kind of get through a neurotypical world, right? And try and do some of those things like focus and make sure that they participate in the meetings and such, because they are so atypical to what other people are expected to do in a meeting. Another example that came up was, it's a kind of a cause célèbre to say, don't, everyone shut their laptops. No one have their laptops open because that's rude, because you're probably just checking your emails and such. And then I've had, for example, autistic friends say, well, no, I need to have my laptop open so that I can take notes in a structured format or whatever, or I need to have something to just to tap with my fingers or something. Do you feel that, I mean, again, there's lots of different types of neurodiversity, but do you feel that in general, these issues are quite poorly understood and that they do have the kind of opportunity to get you in trouble? Or do you think that awareness is kind of growing and people are starting to make affordances for it?
I mean, both. I think they are pre-understood, but things are getting better really quickly. I mean, even just talking about doodling, I got told off at school when I was a kid for doing it. But it turns out if I'd have doodled, I'd probably done better at school, right? That's now changed dramatically. Schools now are very aware of this, and fidget toys are now the norm in meeting rooms as well, right? Which are also incredibly helpful for people with neurodiversity. I think the laptop example, the social norms of the room is what's really important. So someone on a laptop, whether they are autistic or not, if they're taking notes, brilliant. But is it right if they share the notes afterwards? Because that means that they're taking notes for everyone else and they're not on Slack, right? When they're on Slack or on their phone, you've broken the norm, and then there's perception their time's more important than your time, and the whole thing breaks down. You get to those horrible meetings where everyone's laptop and no one's listening, and it's a waste of everyone's time, right? So it's the same with the doodling. I'm very open, my ADHD. I think as a leader of any kind, the most you can be open with your different diversities, the better, because help other people be more open about it. Doesn't mean you have to be, but just I think that's the thing I try and do. And so I do say, hey, I doodle, like this is why. If I'm in a room where I don't want to explain that, so maybe it's a sales meeting or whatever, I've used a notebook and I could be writing notes. I'm actually doodling. No one knows the difference. It's the same principle. And occasionally I am writing notes, right? Actually, I doodle around my notes as well. So they don't necessarily need to know in that example, because writing notes is a very commonly accepted thing. I have dotted paper so I can actually do cubes, which is my way of doodling. Try to draw the perfect cubes, my lifelong ambition.
Well, start getting the Rubik's Cubes out as well. Start doing those in meetings as well, right?
Well, I try on my arm as well, so same thing.
There you go. But you talked then about some of the kind of characteristics or behaviors and kind of superpowers to some extent that, having ADHD can kind of unlock certain things for a product manager. Certainly for yourself, you've obviously developed your own kind of coping mechanisms to kind of keep going on a day-to-day basis, like you say, with doodling and trying to make sure that you're with the notes and stuff, that you're not just interrupting people. But what are some specific things, and not necessarily just from a kind of a people management perspective, but just a product management perspective, like things that you believe specifically someone with ADHD is going to be in a good position to actually make an impact with, that is in some way attributable to the fact that they have ADHD?
Yeah, 100%. I'll go back to when I used to spend a lot of time with people who want to get into product. Less so these days, I don't know if that's me or the market, but either way, I'd always go for a coffee and they'd be like, I really want to be a product manager. And I kind of say, are you sure? Because it's not as glamorous a job as you think it is.
Yeah, run away.
Yeah, I know it sounds great, but like, here's the truth of the matter, right? And they still said yes. I said, okay, well, in that case, you need to like people. Because there's really only two parts of product management. There's liking people enough that you want to ask them questions about the idea of the thing you're building, whether that's formally or at a house party, whatever it might be. And then there's the, okay, now persuade people this is the thing to build. Here's the reason why. Here's the data, right? It's all a people job, in my humble opinion. And this is a slight stereotypical point, but if you have ADHD, you probably grew up having to work quite hard to like you. You probably are someone who was funnier. Stand-up comedians are famously very, very neurodivergent, right? Because you're probably also, I saw something there on TikTok, you're probably also quite annoying. And therefore, you have to sort of compensate the two things together. Right? I was like, oh, that does sound like me, yes. And so you're pretty good with people normally. You're pretty good at making connections. The other thing that ADHD gives you is you can join two things together fast with the people. A lot of your jokes will be like, oh, that's a recall to that thing that was said earlier. That's how your brain works in that regard. So for product management, for that side of things, it's great. However, superpowers for me, I'm always finding I don't love the phrase. I think trade-offs are what it's all about. So that's the great part of it. The downside is the energy part, which is why I haven't seen many ADHD developers, right? We're not so great at sitting down and focusing on a task for 4 hours. And when we have to do that, so you're writing a document, strategy paper, whatever it might be, those drain us beyond belief, right? And therefore, a day of doing that, you almost need a day off afterwards. It's a bit of exaggeration. But how to then fit that into your schedule, that's true for everyone, but then cope with the meetings you have later on in the day, that's really challenging. And I personally am not going to go for breaks. I'm trying to get better always with that, to go for a walk, go for half an hour, whatever it might be. But it's quite easy because you don't feel the pain, the context switch as much as everyone else does, to not think you need breaks. But the moment your tank's empty, it's just over. And then you're just like walking around like a zombie in the office and you have to go home.
Yeah, I think I could definitely, makes sense. It makes sense that would be a problem as well. Do you think, though, that there are any, like, I'm thinking of maybe some of the things that a product leader would have to do. So, for example, going out and giving that big presentation at the all hands or something like that. Now, I've definitely got better at that type of thing over the years, at least in part through doing podcasts like this. But then at the same time, there are people out there that maybe are getting into this for the first time, and especially if they do have ADHD, they might be kind of a bit of a jumbled communicator because they're having so many ideas in their head at the same time, and they find it quite, kind of hard to kind of put some focus and structure around it because, of course, maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but that kind of feels like a thing that would be a challenge. So is that something that you found and have kind of surmounted or come up with like your own frameworks or such to try to kind of structure your communication in a way that can kind of be kind of made ready for prime time? Is that still a journey? Like, how does that work for you?
Definitely. I think this one, I don't know whether I'm the norm, so I can share what's been true for me. And the thing I actually find hardest when giving a presentation is lots of meeting notes, lots of crib notes, pardon me. So actually, my brain moves, my mouth moves too fast for my own good. And therefore, if I'm trying to constantly say, oh, am I step one? Am I step two? My train of thought disappears. Another train of thought enters, and then I'm kind of fucked. Then I'm in this presentation and I've lost where I'm at. So for a lot of people, rehearsing and preparing and walking through it is really great. That helps them have a really structured talk. For me, that's a nightmare because now in my head, it needs to go like this. I guarantee you it won't go like that or go like that, a different way. Therefore, I'm actually better off in those scenarios making the talk the day before. My talk is almost entirely images to just remind me where I am in my storytelling because I'm a decent storyteller. And therefore, behind me, like I can see on the screen, it's just an image. Here's where you're at in the story. But the story itself, I can tweak. as and when I want to do it. And the stories do, like you recall stories in different ways. They're meant to be slightly different each time. Therefore, I never get out of my flow, and therefore it feels quite nice. The biggest risk I have is actually then the speed of how fast I talk. And so actually I put a slide up on the start of all my talks that say, I speak too fast, please tell me to speak slower. And I have friends in the audience like raise their hand and be like, hey, like you're getting too excited, like slow down a little bit.
Almost like kind of a nervous energy, I guess, as you throw yourself into it, because you've got so many ideas to throw out. It is funny, actually. I was speaking to a friend the other day who said that she listens to my podcast at 1.3 times, but everyone else at 1.9 times. And I was like, oh, does that mean I talk too fast to be sped up? So yeah, a little bit. So, oh, okay, fine. Maybe I should speak slower. But, I guess there is that thing, like as you kind of get into your flow, one of the things that I've found myself with giving talks, and I've very much suffered from the kind of the side quest conversation bit where you start talking about something in maybe a little ad-libbed part of a talk or something like that, and then you start kind of getting interested in another thing that was it's kind of another idea, like you say, that's popped into your head, and then you start talking about that thing, and then you realize that you're not talking about the real thing anymore, and then you struggle to get it back onto on track. And for me, rehearsal at least a couple of times, not like I don't want to be word perfect, but like at least going through it and realizing or identifying the points that I believe that I might do that helps me not do that, because I know that that's an area that I'm going to be interested in, so I can kind of forewarned and forearmed not to distract myself with that conversation. But like you say, I think it's just different for everyone, right? Like everyone's got their own kind of mechanisms to kind of make themselves effective.
100%. And what I'll certainly do though is get feedback on the talk itself. I'm not so good that I just rock up. I'm like, cool, here's my insanely interesting new talk, and off I go. Like I regularly have a talk, go to some trusted friends a week before and say, here's what it's going to be about. And they go, this is shit. I'm like, okay, I'll start again then. And that bit I'll get really good, but actually the content I'll do right on the day. Like these are the themes, this is where I'm going to touch. As you say, that helps me stay on track. I think the other thing that I'm always acutely aware of is the time I have available on that stage. That's maybe why I end up speaking faster for that reason. So in that regard, I'm personally not too bad at not going off course and staying on it. But the speed of the conversation I have, especially if I go into a more heavy London accent, is especially tough when I'm speaking internationally. I've been working in Italy a lot recently, and I joked the other day that I'm going to try and speak slower, and they all laughed. And I was like, oh, so you all know? And they're like, yeah, we don't understand half what you're saying. I was like, great, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, but in our defense, it's very difficult to understand Italians or Spanish or any of the Latin languages when they speak fast, is because it's the flow of words as well. So I think everyone speaks too fast, though. It's just no one ever realizes. But yeah, I mean, again, I guess ultimately it's just a case of, to your point, taking feedback, reacting to the feedback, acting and updating your approach based on the feedback, and doing your best to improve, kind of like with a product, right?
I was going to say, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and just knowing what they are is the important bit. That allows you as a smart person to find mechanisms to work with the weaknesses and try and make them less impactful and to harness the positives in that way. I think with ADHD, the thing that I didn't see coming, because I was a late stage diagnosis, someone else actually on the internet saw my working with Benji document and said, I think you've got ADHD, a random person, which I'm very grateful to. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Didn't think about 6 months my way with it. What I didn't think coming into it was, I thought it just meant that the person couldn't sit still, because at school, that was back in the day, what I'm showing my age now, that was like the ADHD person, which was so stupid. What I never thought about was all the positives that came with it, and especially the linking of different data points. So the recall functionality, you have an ADHD person to see the world a different way to other people. That does also mean, so there's deficits on the flip side, the trade-offs. But in a room, if everyone knows you have this, like my advice is also to ask that person, whether they're the product manager or not, to just say, like, how are you seeing this differently to everyone else? Because you have a different lens, not necessarily a better lens, just a different lens with the people. In the same way, the person with autism or dyslexia, whatever neurodivergence they might have, will see the world as a different way. Like I used to work with a lot of autistic engineers, and they were so good at thinking about the edge cases and why something would go wrong. They were so focused on those. And the balancing act of that and someone like me led to a really good decision. Otherwise, everyone in the room's just being like, yeah, let's go. You forget, actually, this might be a really big risk you haven't picked up. Sort of same way as that.
Well, yeah, diverse teams make the party get started, right? It's important to make sure that you've got all these different kind of perspectives and that you're not just all thinking the same things. All right, so imagine then that someone's listening to this. They either have been diagnosed with ADHD, or maybe they think that they have it and they're waiting for diagnosis, or they're just a bit curious and they kind of want to know some kind of starting points, some things that they should start off trying to do to kind of embrace their condition and make sure that they're making a big impact and using it for, like you say, trade-offs, but like doubling down on the positives. Like, what are some kind of concrete things that they should start thinking of trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I would say if you do have a suspicion, and I think it's also become like a bit of a joke these days, and I don't really mind, but like, oh, people are now sort of everyone's ADHD. And if you think, I think the stats are basically, but pre-COVID, the UK was like less than 0.1% of people in the UK were diagnosed with ADHD, whereas in the US, it's like 10%. Well, US overdiagnoses because of the medication system, but even if you think that that's the case, it's not that big a difference. And now we're at something like 1%, which is probably about right. So one, I probably have a little bit of empathy for people who are going through that decision-making process, because it is quite a scary thing to actually analyze yourself in that way and think that maybe something about your brain works differently, because it might be good, but it's still quite scary. And then the thought of medication off the back of that is even scarier, I would say. So one, I'd say just have a bit of empathy for anyone who's going through that. And I recommend, if you are that person, to go and try and find a way to get a test done. Ask your work. Mine got paid for out of my L&D budget. They're interested in trying to catch up really quickly. Secondly, if you are someone who's been diagnosed with it and you're like, right, well, what does my world look like? I know there are lots of people now who are doing ADHD coaching. I've never received that, but I'm sure there are people that are doing a great job on it. But first of all, I just think about, okay, well, what are the coping mechanisms that you've already developed? If you're an adult, you've got loads of them. You probably didn't even realize. So I sat down with a psychiatrist. He looked at my legs. I wear shorts a lot. They were covered in doodles. And he goes, oh, so did you draw on your legs? I was like, well, I sit cross-legged and I draw on my legs. And he goes, right, okay, let's not do that anymore, because that's not a good look for you as a leader, right? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's how I concentrate. Okay, well, let's try and find a way to do that in a different way. Or, okay, let's say in meetings, I used to do lots of coaching with engineers who jumped in all the time and spoke too much. Okay, well, here's 3 Post-it notes. You can only use 3 per meeting now. So really be careful how often you're going to be able to speak and how often you jump into a conversation. And if at the end of a room, you're a bit nervous, that, like, one thing I get with this all the time is I get really worried when I meet new rooms of people, whether I've behaved in the way the social norms were correct, because I often get excited. I'm in and my brain's jumping around and I'm like, oh shit, maybe I spoke too much, right? Same as like going on a first date with someone. Well, ask for feedback afterwards. People are really quick to give it. Just say, hey, in that room, by the way, I've got ADHD. I'm really conscious of it. Is there anything I could have done differently in that room to make it better? They might say no, didn't even notice, or whatever else. But if you ask, at least it removes some of that anxiety. And the anxiety combined with the ADHD can be quite dangerous. Then the third one is just be really cautious of your energy levels, because people without ADHD, when energy levels are low, can cope much better than those who can have ADHD when energy levels are low. You will simply won't be able to connect. You'll feel really quite stupid in a room, and it'll be quite disorientated, to be perfectly honest. So really work out how to manage those energy levels. And if you're not sure, have friends who will say to you, like, go for a walk or whatever. Take 5 minutes, whatever your version that might be.
Nice. Well, hopefully that will help people think a little bit about themselves and some of the approaches they could take. But I guess another thing they could do is come and talk to you about it. So if they want to do that, where could they come and find you after this to add another context for you to switch to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I respond to people there very happily. To be clear, I'm not an expert. I'm one person sharing an opinion. I have been lucky enough to spend time with other people, organizations who suffer as well, or have the condition. Suffer is the wrong word, actually, and talk about with them. So I have some more data points and similarities in what I've read, understood around the topic, but I haven't written a book on it. I'm not going to claim I'm the person to know about it. Not yet. I'd also be very interested to know what ChatGPT and other AI tools would suggest in these circumstances. I've actually never asked them, but I think they've probably got some really good data points to go and test out.
Yeah, well, if we can't get onto the NHS waiting list, I guess ChatGPT is our second option, right? Well, I'll make sure to link all that into the show notes, and hopefully you'll get a few people wandering in your direction to find out a little bit more and catch up and find out about all the rest of the stuff you're doing. All I can do for now is thank you for your hot take.
Thanks, Jason, for having me. Appreciate it.